The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, August 13th, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, it is Michael Jamal Brooks' birthday. He'd be 42 today. To celebrate his birthday, we've invited on two of his favorite guests from the Michael Brooks Show. Milton Allimadi, author, journalist, professor, and co-founder of Black Star News. Also on the program today, Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, the author of The Fight for Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great. Also on the program today, Trump's military troops occupy Washington, D.C.
Oy.
Didn't anticipate my ever doing that as a headline. Trump regime reviewing the Smithsonian exhibits to make sure they comport with the right wing's revisionist history and vision for America. New report, Texas Democrats plan to return in exchange for the end of this special session. Zelensky confers with Trump and EU in lead up to Trump-Putin meeting, where Trump primed to give away the House, literally. Judge orders partial restoration of UCLA research funding. Juneau, Alaska braces for a record glacier melting flooding. Secretary of Treasury and about 14 other jobs at this point, Scott Bessent, calls for a rate cut based upon employment numbers that the Trump administration supposedly doesn't believe. With hundreds now dead of starvation in Gaza, 27 nations demand Israel allow for permanent and immediate access for the UN to provide aid. Minnesota teenager forced to show her breasts to prove her gender in a restaurant bathroom.
Feminism. Thank you, TERFs. Thank you so much.
New poll, Chuck Schumer at his lowest ever favorability rating. He is now underwater with New York City voters for the first time ever. Oh dear. We will be underwater. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Somebody saying audio is choppy.
Refresh if your audio is choppy.
Refresh if your audio is choppy. Meanwhile, Sushi with the Blood Boys says we've already passed the record in Juneau. Welcome, everybody. It is
Hump Day. Happy birthday, Michael Brooks.
It is, like I said earlier, it would be Michael Brooks's 42nd birthday. I don't know, it was a couple of years ago we decided to, in lieu of remembering his death, to celebrate his birthday. Michael, of course, passed away 5 years ago in July 20th. And So today we have a couple of his favorite guests on. He had a lot of favorite guests, but these are, I think, two that I think, and certainly he brought them to audiences that I don't know that would have a chance to hear from these folks. So we're going to bring them on. We'll also hear from Leisha Brooks, Michael's sister, and I think David Griscom will also join us briefly. Part of the Uber producer team, Matt Leck and David Griscom back on the Michael Brooks show. All right, but let's get into it. Daniel from Virginia asked, how would Michael Brooks have reacted to news that there would be a UFC fight on the White House lawn? Is that true? I didn't hear that.
That's what Trump is saying.
Trump is saying it, but I doubt it'll happen.
I mean, he's
I think he would have deferred to Binder on that one.
Exactly.
He'll get distracted by something the next day. Although it seems like they are going to be doing some increasingly integrated events with the White House and with UFC. Part of why the Dana White connection is being promoted. So I don't know. It's a little fascistic.
Conveniently, they just got to deal with Paramount too. UFC.
That's very convenient.
Wow.
Isn't that weird?
What are the chances? Let's turn to this. As you know, Donald Trump fired the the chief of the Bureau of Labor Statistics when the abysmal, really genuinely abysmal jobs report came out about a week and a half ago, claiming that the jobs numbers were false. Based upon the fact that the BLS does what it does every time it releases a jobs report, that is, provides revisions for the 2 months prior, because when they release their jobs report for any given month, they simply don't have all the data in. They have two different ways of measuring this, a household survey and a business survey, which is much more complete, or I should say more complete when all of it's sent in. But not all businesses send in their information in that first month. When it comes in later, they get revisions. It happens all the time. This was not a completely unique downward revision. We've seen that in the past, 2008. There's been other occasions, but it was a dramatic one for sure. So the White House was asked yesterday, what are you going to do? When are you going to release the new reports? I mean, Scott Bessant is now the acting head of BLS. And here is Caroline Levitt answering that question.
Nominee for BLS Commissioner E.J. Antoni recently told Fox Business that the BLS should suspend issuing monthly job reports and only issue quarterly reports until the jobs data methodology is corrected. So does the president disagree with that assessment that his nominee has said there, or suspending these monthly job reports a real option?
I think he floated the idea of possibly suspending until they can get the data and the methodology in order. And this president wants to ensure that the BLS, again, is putting out accurate and honest data that the American people can trust. Since you brought up the new commissioner, he holds a master's and doctor's degree in economics from Northern Illinois University. He's the chief economist in the Heritage Foundation's Center for the Federal Budget. And in addition to his work at Heritage, he has multiple other roles. He's been widely renowned for his work on economic issues. He's been called before Congress to testify as an economic expert. So he's a qualified individual, and the president trusts him to lead this important department.
Two things. One, like I say, Scott Bessant apparently trusts the numbers enough to call for a rate cut, despite the fact that we're seeing core inflation go up. And two, let's look into EJ and Antoni.
Respected expert.
He is a respected expert, according to Caroline Levitt. Here, actually, we'll pop this article on the screen. This is an Axios piece that came out yesterday. Utterly unqualified. Trump's BLS pick gets panned by conservative economists. Oh, well, let's scroll down and see.
We need to fire the people at Axios so we can get some more accurate headlines for President Trump.
Yeah, here we go. What they're saying, Antonio's fellow conservative criticized his record as chief economist at the right-wing Heritage Foundation's Herman Center for the Federal Budget. Stan Vuger, senior fellow at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute said, Antoni's work, quote, work at the Heritage has frequently included elementary errors or nonsensical choices that all bias his findings in the same partisan direction. This is somebody from the American Enterprise Institute. Dave Herbert, who works at the Conservative American Institute for Economic Research, wrote in a post on X that he's worked with Antony before and implored the Senate to block the nomination. Whoopsie. Quote, I've been on several programs with him at this point and have been impressed by two things. His inability to understand basic economics and the speed in which he's gone MAGA. Conservative economists have cited examples of Antony, quote, appearing to misunderstand the data he'd be responsible for as BLS head. Daniel D. Martino, a fellow at the Conservative Manhattan Institute, they are very conservative, showed an institute of Antony citing the rising number of Americans who aren't in the labor force without accounting for the role of aging population.
In terms of my neurological capacity.
Quote, this is one of the many elementary errors that show me Mr. Antony is unqualified for the labor market data collection and analysis role he was nominated to. Jessica Rydell, another person from the Manhattan Institute, senior fellow there. The articles and tweets I've seen him publish are probably the most error-filled of any think tank economist right now.
Come on, he must be peer-reviewed, and by peer-reviewed, I mean he has a positive letter of recommendation from Ron Vera.
Yeah, exactly, I'm sure. Or maybe he has a positive recommendation from Mr. Tony and
Tony J.E.
Exactly.
Tony Soprano. It's AJ Soprano who's going to head the BLS.
It's also, I mean, there's bipartisan support for this guy being an idiot. Jason Furman, who was on Biden's White House chair, White House Council of Economics Advisors. I don't think I've ever publicly criticized any presidential nominee before, but E.J. Antony is completely unqualified to be a BLS commissioner.
I mean, even on EJ alone.
The RSM U.S. chief economist Joe Brussels said that would be a serious mistake in my estimation. It would only fuel critiques of politicization of job market data. I mean, it keeps going on and on.
EJ stands for economy genius.
Exactly. and just to top it off, aside from being at least judged by his peers, both on the left and the right, as being totally unqualified for this job. And despite the fact that the guy's talking about not releasing this data, which I would imagine is pretty important to some people, here he is doing a Fox business hit and has chosen an interesting background. That being apparently a Nazi battleship cruiser. It is a German Bismarck wall art canvas printing decor. I mean, it costs $90. I mean, so maybe it was discounted, but to be fair, but there it is.
Look, he's an economist, not a historian.
Exactly.
But he's just very interested in that history, that particular part of history, one side of that history, in fact. He's just a collector, like, who was the sugar daddy for
the
Clarence
rich guy,
Thomas?
I forget what his
Harlan Crow.
Harlan Crow. They're just interested in history.
But there it is. It remains to be seen if the Republicans in the Senate are going to kowtow to Trump this much when they have this sort of broad. I have a feeling a lot of these guys are going to take vacation that day. They're going to basically like be out of town. There'll be 40 Republicans in the Senate, and the Democrats will be able to block this nomination. I mean, otherwise it really is. I mean, it's off to the races time. I guess we are already off to the races, but
this is significant.
Seeing them openly and actively hire a guy explicitly to manipulate the data, watching them also simultaneously do things like get the Smithsonian to change its exhibits based upon revisionist history and Donald Trump's proclivities. I mean, we are in an authoritarian state. It sounds dramatic to say these things, but you have military occupying Washington, D.C. My guess is they're not going to last there longer than 30 days, but then they'll move on, and they're just going to keep trying to extend the program.
But
that's basically it.
I mean, the bond market's a mess, and you want to know why? Why would people buy long-term U.S. bonds if the employment data, they have no idea if it's true or not, or even the inflation data, where a lot of our most reliable securities are pegged to inflation to encourage investment and to basically show that these are going to be very stable securities. It's like a $2 trillion market. That's in jeopardy now, because if you can't rely on government data, people aren't going to want to invest in the United States.
Yeah.
Both like in terms of small business interests, but also like buying our bonds.
In a moment, we're going to be talking to Milton Allimadi, author, journalist, professor, co-founder of Black Star News. First, a word from our sponsors. As people know, I am a very carefree person. And
sorry.
I'm a very carefree person.
You're always skipping around
and
through meadows and things like that.
And people often ask me, how come you're so carefree, Sam? Why is it like you're so laid back and so chill all the time? Well, I tell them the reason is because basically I am not worried about the one thing that used to freak me out. The reason why I come off as much more relaxed than I used to be is because I got a will for just in case I pass away. I mean, eventually I'm going to. But that's the bottom line. A lot of us, particularly, I mean, I didn't do this until I had a kid. But if you want to get the most out of life, you got to be prepared. A lot of us don't realize that a will doesn't cover everything when it comes to estate planning. Trust and will can help ensure that your loved ones are covered when it comes to things like medical decisions and power of attorney. This is really important stuff, actually. And I will also say, important, even if you have like a kid who's just maybe over 18, you want things like medical decisions and power attorney for them too, so that it because they're their own individual, they're no longer minors, and so you need to go in. I mean, God forbid something like that happens, but this is important stuff to get, and more than anything else, it just gives you peace of mind. It's one of those nagging things that you think in the back of your head, oh, I got to get this done. Go to trustandwill.com/majority. You get 20% off their simple, secure, and expert-backed estate planning services. For most people, this stuff is fairly straightforward, and Trust and Will makes it really easy. The website is intuitive. They walk you through everything. And again, just knowing that you've done this gives you a huge peace of mind. All your information, your documents are securely stored with bank-level encryption. Each will or trust is state-specific, it is legally valid, and it's customized to your needs. Estate planning, even if you have a very simple situation, can feel confusing and certainly can feel intimidating, but it's super easy to do. Trust and Will just walks you right through all of it. An overall rating of excellent, thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot, used by hundreds of thousands of families and counting. You can't control everything, but Trust and Will can help you take control of protecting your family's future. Go to trustandwill.com, one word, /majority. Trustandwill.com/majority. Get 20% off. That's 20% off at trustandwill.com/majority. All right, quick break. When we come back, Milton Allimadi. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Milton Allimadi. He is an author, journalist, professor, and co-founder of Black Star News. And Milton, it is Michael Brooks's birthday. Yes. You were one of his favorite guests. And so, we've been trying to sort of like, I don't know, do what Michael would be doing, or right. At least, be talking about some of the things on his birthday. One of the things that he had, that he really brought to the show, broadly speaking, was a wealth of knowledge when it came to foreign policy, but also a real knowledge base and curiosity of what was happening in the global South, yes. And in particularly, throughout Africa. And you were one of his, primary sources of information. So really appreciate your coming on today.
Thank you.
And in that spirit, we'd ask you, what do you think he would want to be talking about? What would he be following today? And one of those things you had mentioned was France's complete withdrawal from West Africa. Tell us a little bit about that and the relevance. And then maybe we can get into also what's happening in the wake of USAID coming out, right. But what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, very good. All right, so I think when we had our first conversation about Africa, West Africa, it was focused on Burkina Faso. He was a huge fan of the late Thomas Sankara. And me too, by the way. So I think today he would be impressed to see that there is a resurgence of the spirit of Sankara, wanting to take control of the destiny of African countries, wanting to kick out French neocolonialism. French neocolonialism was very special relative to the colonial experience in Africa. So when you compare with Britain, for example, the British withdrew, they relinquished control over the finances. Of course, they could still control it in a different way. Now they could rely on the World Bank and the IMF.
Right.
But France, in addition to the World Bank and the IMF, tied the currencies of the West African countries to the French franc. And it tied it in a very peculiar way. They were required to keep a portion, at one point it was 50% of their reserves in the French central bank, meaning France was pretty much managing the economies because France was investing that surplus fund. And if it made money for them, good. If it lost, too bad, right? So that's how dominant France was. And of course, the French also had military garrisons in those former West African colonies. And that's why it's even hard to, all of these countries generally, when you talk about independence, it's very superficial. They have their own national anthem, they have their flags, they have their state house, they have their president, they have all the symbols of statehood, but they don't really have sovereignty, generally speaking. even for the former British colonies, as I said. But add to that what I just factored in with the French arrangement. So you can now understand why the French presence is so widely resented, even by other African countries that were not former French colonies. So when Thomas Sankara came on the stage in 1983, it was quite remarkable. Here is somebody in a former French colony where neocolonialism is so dominant, coming into power and taking, you know what we can actually do for ourselves. We can run our own country. We can produce our own food. Why are we importing bottled water, for example? And he instituted agrarian reform. The land was made widely available to people that previously did not own land. Production grew within 3 years. Burkina Faso became self-sufficient in food. So obviously France did not like this example that Sankara was setting and made it its mission to eliminate Sankara using the leader at the time of neighboring Ivory Coast, Felix Houphouët-Boigny, a very tightly controlled neocolonial leader. So then Sankara was off the stage, and now you see this resurgence. You see the current leader, Ibrahim Traoré, evoking the spirit, memory, and the practice of Sankara. You see it being duplicated in Mali as well, and in Niger. So this is a conversation that I'm sure Michael would really enjoy exchanging with me.
And I mean, what is leading to the? Is it that the French are being pressured out, or is it simply like the French don't have the resources or reorienting, or is it a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. And that's a very good question, actually. I think France, obviously by virtue of being a member of NATO, by having a strong relationship with the United States, was able to project beyond its power militarily on the African continent. I think that is no longer the case. I think, for example, when you had the coup in Niger, the US had built a couple of years ago a $100 million drone base in Niger. So when the new government, the military government came in Niger, gave France an ultimatum, you have to leave by such and such a date. You've been exploiting our uranium. We're going to ban further exports until we come up with an arrangement that benefits us financially. So the US, with France, they're normally on the same page on issues like that. But the US realized, wait a minute, we need to speak a different language with them in case they allow us to remain and keep our drone base. So the US actually ended up staying an additional several more months while Niger was considering. And then Niger came to the conclusion that, no, US, you have to go as well. So generally speaking, in the past, France was able to flex more muscles than it really had because of US support. So that has made it much more difficult. And plus, I think the young people are much more aware now and much less willing of being exploited by the French. Unlike the older generation, where we had a few, they would handpick the bourgeois African leaders to support, and those leaders would be able to maintain solid control with French military support. But the young people are now showing that they're willing to come out on the streets and protest much more vigorously. And France obviously does not want to be seen supporting a government that is shooting down its own citizens.
How does that history or that understanding with young people translate to other countries now trying to invest in African countries, particularly China, as well as it builds out infrastructure across the continent? I'm curious if there's that same skepticism, rightful skepticism that carries over now.
Okay, so when we come to China, China has a very unique relationship with Africa because, as you pointed out, China has built a lot. In fact, the African Union headquarters, for example, in Addis Ababa, that was built by China. A lot of the impressive roads, highways in Addis Ababa, built by China. The bridges, the railways, it's invested a lot in rail, something which the West has not been willing to do.
I was there 26 years ago, in Addis Ababa, and everyone was talking about how the Chinese were investing there.
Yes, absolutely. But of course, that also comes with a cost. They're not doing this for free. This is not the China of Chairman Mao. No, this is a very different China. The China of Chairman Mao built that great railway connecting Tanzania to Zambia, for example, call it the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. That was done much in the spirit of solidarity, because when they started working out that relationship, China was not a member of the United Nations yet. That we had Taiwan. So China needed a lot of African support and solidarity in order to get seated at the UN. Eventually that happened. And of course, now China is part of the a permanent member of the Security Council. But the China that we have today is very much market-oriented China. So China comes and builds all these roads, but of course, in return, they want either payment or they want a significant stake in your mineral resources. So the young people are now questioning that relationship as well with China. Why are we mortgaging our resources for such a long period of time? So you have younger leaders. In the case of the military leaders in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, they know that, okay, once you kick out the French, you're going to need an alternative. So for right now, that's why they were building this tighter relationship with Russia. Not so much that they have a particular love for Russia, but if Russia can give them military support to withstand any possible aggression from France, they're going to take that. But then you have the case of a leader like Bassirou Faye in Senegal, who is a civilian, but came to power because of a young activist who came out in the street when France wanted Macky Sall, who had served 2 terms, but had a very neo-colonial relationship that France was happy with. They wanted to support him to even extend into a 3rd term, even though it was banned by the Constitution. That's when the young people came out on the street, led by people like Bassirou Faye, and ultimately forced them to have elections, which Bassirou Faye's party won. So now he is trying to play off the Chinese relationship with the West, with the United States, with France. So that's the kind of tightrope that he's walking in terms of the difference between his approach and the approach of the leaders in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. But ultimately, the young people are also questioning the neo-colonial control that the World Bank and the IMF has over African countries. I think the best example of that was what we saw in Kenya last year, when the government wanted to hike taxes because it wanted to increase its capacity to pay the World Bank and IMF loans. And the young people are saying, we're already being bled really to death. We can't afford to pay anymore. And the taxes were on items that you cannot live without: food, fuel, and housing. So they organized on social media. It was very powerful, very effective. They forced the government to cancel those taxes. It came at a cost, of course. At one time, the government, just seemed to lose control, and young people are being shot at with live ammunition. I think more than 50 were killed, but ultimately they succeeded. So that is the kind of change that we're seeing in the African continent right now, where young people are becoming much more vigorous in challenging the neo-colonial status quo.
And France seems to have they get a little white-knuckled about this stuff, it feels like. I mean, I have never been able to get over their claim on Haiti's, gross national product up until, and people I don't think realize this, Haiti had to pay back France the cost of freeing themselves as slaves until, what was it, like 1950? And maybe it was 1948 or something like that, but that's 100 and, I don't know, I can't do the math, 150 years or so. And that sets a country back a little bit. If you lose 150 years of essentially compounding interest in being able to reinvest your resources.
Absolutely. And that's a tragedy.
A huge tragedy. And France was sort of like really they had their grip was the last on some level to go, at least from that era of colonialism.
Yeah. And of course, the Haitian Revolution, you don't want something like that to spread. That is not a good example to be to allow to spread in places where African was still enslaved. So that was part of the reason that, okay, even though they kicked us out physically, militarily, we still have ways to make them pay the price and to set an example to other places where Africans may want to emulate or duplicate what the Haitian people did. And also it goes with the whole spirit of how dare you deprive the ruling planter class of their assets, of their property. That is not a good example as well. So a lot of people were not aware until recently, because now in recent years it's been the news, that after the slavery was abolished in Britain in 18, when was it? Was it 1883?
No. Slavery was earlier than that in Britain. I believe it was like 1830.
Yeah, somebody looked it up. I thought it was like 1883. But anyway, after they abolished, they compensated the former enslavers. Those were the ones who were compensated, not the formerly enslaved, you see? So it was consistent with what France was doing as well.
Yep.
How dare you deprive us of our assets? The amount that Britain compensated the former enslavers, if you do it, let's say in 2024 US currency, it will come more than $2 billion. That's how much they were compensated, you see? So it goes with that whole mentality that you are not entitled to your liberty and to deprive us of our income, which we're entitled to from your sweat and blood.
So it was 1834. I knew it was before the states got to it.
Yeah,
but,
I mixed it around by putting 83. I was going to say 38, something like that. But yeah, thank you for that.
What are the implications of the aid cuts that we've seen from, obviously from the Trump administration is basically all but abolished USAID. And what's your perspective on USAID? Because there's sort of it is another mechanism of control on some level, but also it saved a certain amount of lives.
Absolutely. And that is the catch-22, and that is the tragedy. Of course, the tragedy is for the neo-colonial, bougie, African elite leadership that emerged after independence to allow themselves to develop that kind of dependency with the World Bank, with the IMF, and with these institutions. The British have their versions of these institutions as well that have made African countries so dependent on these quote-unquote aid organizations. So you have a situation where now, and I'm not saying it's directly tied to USAID per se, but you have African countries that have abundant, fertile land. And yet, on an annual basis, Africa imports $35 billion worth of food. That is preposterous. They've never been this food dependent since even the 1960s. In the 1960s, they used to grow much more of their food than they import today. So in a roundabout way, to answer your question, I'm saying in the short run, it is going to be devastating, of course. In countries like South Africa, for example, that depended on a very significant amount of that money to support their healthcare program, the fight against HIV/AIDS. A lot of people that won't have access to the medicines are going to die, So obviously, nobody can support that kind of unilateral overnight cut, right? This is something that should be phased out, but definitely should be phased out. so that these countries can develop their own capacities because they have the natural resources. They have the natural resources to generate wealth from that and get away from this dependency. And that also applies to the economies, for example. So you have today in 2025, the same structure that was created and established in 1884-85 at the infamous Berlin Conference when African countries were partitioned by the European powers. What did they set up? They own the territory. So it's like a new form of slavery, in fact. They own the territory, they control the population, they impose subjugated labor upon them, they take away their land, so now they don't have independent income to be independent because they're now dependent on working on the people that are now taking over their land. They produce raw materials that are shipped off to those European countries that have now industrialized. They manufacture products that they bring it back to African countries. So they have a captive market. The Africans have no choice but to buy those manufactured products from Europe. 2025, we have the same arrangement. There's not a single industrialized African country, right? So the Europeans don't even have to be physically in control anymore. You know, you have the World Bank and the IMF. Right. You want to get a loan from them, they're going to give you conditions which preclude industrialization. So it's 2025, you're still selling raw materials.
How explicitly do they preclude it? I mean, is it explicit or is it just that they put constraints on capital investments?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, they can't come and say, you know, you can't take this money and put it in this and that. So they use a so-called free market, right? You know, they talk about the free market as if we even have the free market here in the United States, right?
Right.
So they say you should put the money into the, what do they call it? What you have a comparative advantage in, right? And obviously your comparative advantage is not producing cars, right? You should import that from the US or Britain or from European countries. Your comparative advantage in producing raw materials. And that's the argument they make, you know?
And that's the constraints they put on the loans, essentially.
On the loans, essentially. And that's only half of it. And then the other half is, and this has been referred to as structural adjustment. Also, we don't want wasteful spending. So you have to lay off civil servants. You have to lay off teachers. You have to stop subsidizing education. You have to stop subsidizing healthcare. There's an interesting documentary. It's called "The End of Poverty," with a question mark. It's pretty old, like 20 years. It needs to be updated. But I mean, do you have Africans being interviewed describing the impact of these conditionalities? People dying of simple malaria. Because now when you go to a health clinic, if you don't pay cash, you won't have access to quinine and basic medication that would save your life. That is just one of the types of impacts. You have people that have been kicked out of school now because they have to pay now because the government is not subsidizing education.
It's fascinating stuff. Milton, we could continue this conversation, and there's a lot other things too. I think that we could be talking about. We have to move on, but let's do this again soon.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we love Michael, and we miss Michael, and may he rest with the ancestors in peace.
Indeed. And we will put links to some of the past interviews and conversations that you had with Michael on TMBS in our podcast and YouTube description. Again, Milton, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good to see you, Milton.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, another one of Michael's favorite guests, Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Emeritus of Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and the author, The Fight for Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great, will be with us in just a moment. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland. On the Majority Report today would have been Michael Brooks's 42nd birthday. And to celebrate his birthday, we're having some of his favorite guests on. And want to welcome back to the program one of Michael's very favorite guests. One of the, I feel like one of the first people who are actually in studio here. Harvey J. Kaye. He is, of course, Professor Emeritus in Democracy and Justice Studies at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, author of The Fight for Four Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great. I think we just had you on with the letter hack for the comic strip. The comic strip, the graphic novel, I guess, maybe? I don't know. But
we were hoping to get there, yeah.
And Harvey, you were one of Michael's favorite guests, and he loved talking to you. And you've been on the Majority Report many times too. But I mean, we were trying to sort of get a sense of what would he be talking about these days? It wouldn't be radically different from what we've been talking about. But wanted to get your take. I mean, we're in. How unique of an era are we in relative to authoritarianism? And then we could talk about what we need to do to push back on it.
Well, first I'll just say you mentioned in studio. I always had an arrangement with Michael that if he would say, when you want to come on soon, I said, well, I'm going to be in Brooklyn the next month to visit our daughter who lives in Greenpoint. And so I would end up in studio, which was always a pleasure. If I were in Brooklyn right now, I would rather be with you folks as opposed to Zooming with you folks. And one of the things that was always the case, Michael talked about three mentors, Adolf Reed, Richard Wolff, and me. Each one of us had a kind of separate orientation. Adolf was very much a political scientist, Richard Wolff an economist, and I was the historian of that crew. So whenever I was on, Michael would always ask, how did we get here? Okay, and we're talking several years at the least ago when these questions began, maybe 10 years ago. And I remember using the term, for 40 years, we've had this creeping, they used to talk about creeping socialism back in the 50s. Well, we've had creeping authoritarianism ever since the 70s and the declaration of war, essentially by capital, conservatives, and the neoliberals who came into the show around then. And here we are. We've seen it for all these decades, and basically the Republican Party lives up to the worst expectations. The Democratic Party is hardly relevant and allowed themselves to become decreasingly relevant all these years. So how unique is this? Well, in terms of authoritarianism for the United States, this is actually very unique. In terms of authoritarianism for large segments of the population, no. We had slavery, right. Okay, then we had the Reconstruction period, which everyone thought might be a moment of real liberation, but then they ended up imposing the Bourbon regimes in the South. Immigrants had their own struggles to get along. Women, of course, always experienced versions of that. But this is in its own way, every crisis, every moment is unique. And in many ways, this is unique because we have done the nightmare version. We allowed ourselves, and I'm not saying you and I are responsible or Emma responsible. We allowed ourselves to elect a man who already indicated his aspirations of dictatorship and authoritarianism. And most people out there either didn't believe him or thought he was comical when he would talk in those terms. They didn't imagine he might actually begin to pursue it. And if you think about the past 6 months, we are in. This is one of the great crises in American history, I think. Really one of the great crises, and the action to get out of this is a challenging one.
It really, it is. It happened very quickly when we crossed that threshold. It's like a tough line to see crossed until you sort of see it in your rear view mirror. And, the idea that we have troops on that have been deployed to Washington, D.C., after being sort of deployed to L.A., right? And this stuff with the Smithsonian, with the BLS, with the massive federal police force that ICE is going to create, with the deportations, and making law firms and universities, bend the knee essentially, and so it seems dramatic. And in terms of like a fascistic movement, put aside the authoritarianism for a moment. We've seen this kind of fascism, though, rise in this country, right? I mean, we had the KKK at about 10% of the population in 1920. And we had I don't know how far in the attempt of the coup of FDR we got, with Smedley Butler, et cetera, but where does it rate along along that line?
Along that line, I think this remains unique. Here's what I mean. Okay, if we assume for the moment that he has the MAGA base, as it's called, okay, and I'll be generous and say the MAGA base might be 30% of the American people, although it's probably shifting a bit in light of events. That's rather unprecedented. So if you go back to the 30s, for example, with the attempted coup, to take out FDR, and the attempted coup from above, which that is investing huge sums of money in the 1930s by way of the American Liberty League. The billionaires of the day, the multi-millionaires of that time, invested heavily to try to take him down. But what FDR had, okay, and this is to his advantage, and it's not to the advantage of Trump specifically, or ever would have been to the advantage of Biden, is that FDR, by the time of 2 years into his presidency, they loved him. The American working class loved him, whatever reservations they might have had, because he had already begun to show that his party was committed to addressing not just the economic depression, but the inequalities and the authoritarianism of capital. Okay, right away in the first 100 days, we all talk about the National Labor Relations Act of 1935, which empowered collective bargaining and the right to organize unions and placed the government at that time solidly behind those efforts. But in fact, in 1933, FDR had already signed into law the National Industrial Recovery Act, which included just those kinds of rights. And sadly speaking, capital found a way around it by way of creating, for a while, company unions. The other thing was that FDR made it clear when he signed the National Industrial Recovery Act into law, he said quite publicly, the time has come for corporations and businesses to pay nothing less than a living wage. Now, these are the kind of signals FDR sent, and Americans mobilized. Hundreds of thousands and millions ended up joining the labor movement. Civil rights organizations actually began to rev up in a significant way in the 1930s. There was a massive national housewives movement that took place when they found that companies were often, trying to jack up prices in order to cover what would have been the higher wages. So in that sense, the tumult of that time favored FDR and the Democratic Party, which, other than the Southern Democrats, had decidedly moved in a direction that, though the term wasn't used by FDR or the Democrats, social democratic direction. Social Security, National Labor Relations Act, housing, across the board, those kinds of dramatic changes. So this is unique because we have a man in office right now who was elected. And, if I can just sidebar a moment. To me, the critical moment was probably when Obama was elected, at least to have shifted gears. If Obama had pursued half of the promises that Yes We Can implied, we might never have arrived here. Okay,
and just from a structural standpoint, there was really started when he was the nominee. They began to coalesce power. Specifically the word went out, do not support outside groups. We're bringing it all in-house. And then Obama for America basically was, led into a dungeon, as it were, after. And there was a specific agenda, I mean, a tactic in their mind to disempower the organizing, the populism that had built around Obama. Yeah. And I mean, I don't think it was ever his agenda to be populist, but as evidenced by the fact that they did not want any other power bases outside of the White House to exist. And we ended up seeing the results of that, both in how hard it was for them to get the ACA through, even with ultimately with 60 votes, but also how many elected officials in the states were lost over that time.
I think it was about 700.
A thousand, I think, over the two terms. And, that's why we lost the governorships. That's by 2010, all of that redistricting happened at that time. There was some state comptroller who left politics because they didn't know where to go because the whole bench was wiped out. But so let's talk about the sort of like the what FDR did as a proof of concept in terms of like the electoral power of this, because I think there's we operate, not everybody, but there is one mode of operation where the Democrats are trying to figure out how to win, and they can't figure out how to do it, and they argue that we need to moderate, and but the Democrats know we have proof of concept, right? I mean, even if you look at it the most cynical way, it's there. The people don't realize this. I mean, at least you and I do because we're old. But people in this office, like, Democrats controlled the Congress until 95. And I mean, for 40 years straight, they controlled 50 years straight. They controlled the House because of these reforms. And so it's out there. It's just, there are certain percentage of Democrats, maybe over 50%, maybe less, who use this question of how do we get elected as a way of making sure, of really saying, how do we get elected with a set of policies that are not going to disempower our benefactors?
Clearly they're all praying for a Cuomo victory or possibly even Eric Adams victory in New York. God forbid that New Yorker.
Oh my God! I'm joking.
I don't know if how do you pronounce that name?
I think it's Sliwa, but I did find out the other day he lives in a studio apartment with like over a dozen cats. So I don't know if I trust that guy fully.
Well, I have a feeling that's a function of divorce.
I've heard New Yorkers who are progressive say, hell, better him than Cuomo or.
Well, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So look, I mean, what's interesting is I'm a generation ahead of you, Sam, but our generation.
Just barely.
Okay. Yeah. Well, to me, you got everyone else has stayed younger while I'm getting older. The thing is that we were taught wrongly about FDR. Americans, of the post-war years, those of us who were baby boomers, so to speak, we were taught that this was all because, FDR was a liberal, okay, and he saved America from capitalism, et cetera. That's what made him great. And they really did not want to make the case that, well, the point is that FDR had said even before he took office that he needed to make America fairly radical for at least a generation. In writing, he had sent to a friend who was like the foremost figure in the field of academic social welfare questions. And then from that first 100 days, immediately challenged Americans to try to live up to that. Now, there's no doubt that at the outset he made accommodations with capital. But when they made it clear they were not going to give way, he turned. And in 1936, and you can imagine how much the working people loved it, he said, at the Democratic National Convention, 1936, in Philadelphia, at a stadium of like 100,000 people, nationally broadcast. He said, you know, they complain, and when he said they, he meant the economic royalists complain that we want to overthrow American institutions. And he said, but what they really complain of is that we want to overthrow their power. And to paraphrase, and guess what? They're right. I mean, he made it clear, however much it didn't happen, maybe as people on the left today would have said, oh, geez, but he didn't do this and that. The fact is, that was a remarkable 12-year presidency. And you're right, not until 1995. I mean, they briefly lost Congress in 1946, but they got it back. And right, all the way through. I mean, even Dwight Eisenhower in 1954 said, when his brothers asked him, who was a conservative down in Texas, when are you going to start doing what we put you in office to do? And he said, anybody, any party that tries to get rid of labor's rights, of Social Security, I mean, he went on and on and on, will never be heard from again in this country. Okay? And then, of course, our generation was involved from the bottom up, so to speak, watching our parents' generation elect the most liberal, indeed progressive Congress since the 1930s. And one advantage they had is that, of course, they had experience, and what they knew to do was to have a president who surprised them, okay, and became the most progressive president since FDR. Again, the war, and I can give you other reasons in which, you know, I have real criticisms of the Johnson administration, but they did institute a second effort at least of approaching a New Deal. And then what did the Democrats do in the 70s? It's like they said, well, I guess it's, we got to turn our back on labor, on the working class, on the FDR tradition. By the way, that included the likes of Gary Hart and in time, well, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and on and on and on and on. And it is amazing. It isn't that the Democrats, I used to think, well, the Democrats forgot, right? Well, they didn't forget. They literally sold out and were bought up.
Right.
Okay. But here's the thing, and this is the amazing thing that people also don't realize, and I don't know how many times it shows up in the media, they occasionally do make it clear. The majority of Americans still want exactly the kinds of things that FDR pursued and promised, especially in 1944 with the idea of an economic Bill of Rights. I mean, we actually had polling done, those of us who were involved in this project of creating an economic Bill of Rights. And to our pleasure, we found out that, the majority of Americans want essentially an economic Bill of Rights. And at least in the Democratic side of the thing, they really want it. The great majority wanted it. But what do the Democrats do? What do? Sorry, I'm getting revved up here as if I was with Michael back then,
Right.
But what do? They allowed Biden to stay in office, say he was going to run. They then choose or position Harris to take over. Even at the moment where they might have done something, when she chose Walz, they send him out against Vance in a debate. This is like that moment where you see it happening. And they probably told him, just shut up.
Right.
Don't say anything. And that was like the final straw in some ways, because the election was relatively close. But seriously speaking, it's like when people used to say, well, the Democrats really don't want to win. The consultants make more money as losers. And I used to joke about it. And I used to laugh at them and say, come on, don't be ridiculous. But it isn't that. It's that they don't want to lose the donors, period. Okay? And the fact is, we are the majority. Progressives are the majority. And the point now is to try to organize. And I as I sent the note to Brian and to you, look, the left has got to grow up. Okay? We have got to come together around a radical, and I say radical because in this day and age it sounds radical, a radical, call it progressive, I don't care, vision that approaches or actually endorses and embraces an economic Bill of Rights, because it is what Americans want, and Democrats especially want it. And by the way, you can't work without it. We have got to align these progressive organizations with larger and smaller movements. We have got to get labor to remember that in 1944, when FDR called for an economic Bill of Rights, they launched national campaigns in pursuit of it, and they never gave up that vision until at some point they were so smashed, I don't think they could imagine anything after the 70s and 80s with Carter and Reagan. I mean, and then last but not least, you have Ro Khanna on occasionally, do you not?
We haven't, but certainly familiar.
I mean, he and I spoke together a year ago at the pre-convention progressive thing, and I think people like him in the congressional caucus, progressive congressional caucus, it's about time they came out bluntly, not policy by policy, bluntly, and said, in a manifesto-like way to the Democratic Party, this is what we stand for. We stand with FDR, period. And that's what we want.
Right. And then you can hit the Republicans on being the party of the robber barons of the current era. And then you make it a full circle historical kind of perspective here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I got two questions for you. One was one historical and one just referencing what you had mentioned. But let me just start with this. Where's McGovern in that? I mean, I know where Hart is, Gary Hart and Clinton, and the sort of like rise of the more austerity, corporate-oriented Democrats. But McGovern was, and I've always perceived McGovern as being sort of like he's been smeared as being the hippie choice, and I mean, he was very progressive on a lot of things, but he was somewhat I don't know if he was anti-labor. I guess this is what I'm asking you, because he certainly was, he was in charge of a commission that that introduced more democracy to the Democrats in terms of their primary process, but also specifically to disempower labor leaders at that time. So where do you put him in? That's the piece I've never fully understood about McGovern.
Yeah, it's really, that's like one of those tragic moments. What happened was, after 68, at the Democratic Convention, they created a commission to examine how candidates were chosen in the party. And McGovern chaired that commission. And indeed, it had to do with primaries and other things. And they set it up in a way that labor's capacity to influence the outcome of elections within the party would be reduced in favor of folks who had been marginalized, for women, minorities.
It democratized it. I mean, it used to be sort of like more of like a smoky back room type of situation.
And that's first to remember that. Actually, it's the second thing that George Meany, the head of the AFL-CIO, was shocked by. I mean, absolutely shocked. The first one, you got to go back a little further. In 65, 66, a bill appeared before House and Senate. Okay. And the bill was to finally bring an end. Should have mentioned this earlier. An end to the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 that disempowered labor in the sense that it made it extremely difficult, I won't go into the whole thing, to organize in the South, which, by the way, also utterly hampered the civil rights movement, for those years. So anyhow, the bill it comes up, and it's before the Senate. And needless to say, there's a filibuster being pursued by a combination of especially Southern Democrats and perhaps some Northern Republicans. So McGovern was from South Dakota, and he didn't know what to do. South Dakota, I believe, had already become a right-to-work state. And he actually asked for permission, I think, from who I don't know. He voted to not bring an end to the filibuster. That began the animosity that labor started to feel for him. That would have changed. By the way, those are the kinds of things that would have changed the course of American political history.
Right. I mean, people have to understand Taft-Hartley was like Empire Strikes Back against the National Labor Relations Act, and really curbed and started the essentially was the beginning of the end of union dominance in this country. It took a couple of decades, but Taft-Hartley really narrowed the ability. It meant you couldn't have cross-sector strikes. You couldn't have strikes outside of shops. I mean, it really limits labor's ability. And if we had gotten rid of that at that time, we'd have a very different country right now.
Yeah, and people often say that it was the civil rights and the civil rights movement, and then the riots of the late '60s that brought an end to the Democratic Party hegemony, so to speak. But if you actually look at the surveys and polls of the period in the '70s through the '80s, when Republicans asserted themselves and neoliberalism emerges as the powerful force in the Democratic Party, most Americans were still saying, the majority of them, they wanted Great Society, New Deal kinds of policies. But the Democrats turned their back on it. Yeah, but so anyhow, so we get to 72 at the convention, and they choose McGovern, and Meany, not all of Labor, but Meany and the AFL-CIO representatives there, they walked out, and they sent a signal that to the Democratic Party that, you can't depend on us in the same way.
And part of that wasn't just a personal animosity to McGovern. I mean, there was a sort of like a cohort of people who would ultimately be known as the Reagan Democrats.
Oh, absolutely,
who were responding against the emancipation movements of women and of Black people and of otherwise marginalized people in our society. But do we see that strain today with Sean O'Brien and the Teamsters, who are now moving towards the Republic? I mean, this is the sort of the dilemma. Have we alienated labor to the extent at this point, with the Democrats not being the party of the working class, enough that like we're going to have to do something radical to reorient and get back? I mean, there's no returning to the status quo, it seems to me.
No, thank goodness. The scary part is that there is no returning, but that's also the challenge.
Yep.
Okay. I mean, if the Democrats want to go on in the way they have, it's not the end of the Democratic Party. It's literally the end of American democratic life. Okay. I mean, when you have, look, I'm sorry, I'm pulling slightly away, but I know you've mentioned the presence of troops in Washington, D.C., right? I mean, they're there essentially to antagonize.
Right.
Okay? I mean, not all those guardsmen are saying to themselves, yeah, I'm going to antagonize. But that's Trump's intention. Okay? He's looking for an excuse. And when and after the 30 days, I think it was you said it, they're pulled out, he'll go to another city. And he's already implied, what do they call that, dog whistle-like way? He'll go to the cities where African Americans govern. Okay? Yeah. He'll push it and push it. So, I mean, it's going to take a hell of a lot of patience not to blow. But on the other hand, the Democrats better realize their job is not to moderate. It's literally to get out of the way. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's
no. But I mean, it's all. And lastly, you said on the left we have to grow up and unite around a progressive or radical social democratic vision. Who's going to grow up? What is involved in that? Like, what do you mean by that?
You may have noted when I sent that message to Brian, I said liberals and liberals and the left. So liberals are going to have to grow up and start and stop talking about simply worrying about, if you like, the politics of it. They're going to have to start realizing that behind the politics of it is the point of the economic royalists. Okay, so it's not a matter of persuading. It's not a matter of how you sell the party. Yep. I mean, think about I don't even know how anyone can bear to listen to what my fellow LSU alum, what's his name?
Carville?
Carville. Gee,
I thought you were going to say Pete Buttigieg, because he's the new version of what we're talking about here.
I mean, I've got my target, so to speak, but yeah. I chose the one that just turns my stomach when I hear him, okay? I mean, those folks literally need to be displaced. They need to be sent home. And, if any Democrat anywhere along the way has acted like a neoliberal in any fashion, we should make it clear we're not going to buy it. But we got to start making it clear now. So I'm talking about, there are still militant liberals, as well as, for lack of a better way of putting it, socialists who show up in various places, and the progressives who have their organizations, PDA, okay, Our Revolution, and others. They need to sit down and say, okay, it's not a matter of compromise. It's a matter of winning. And the time has come for us to organize around, and I use the example of the Economic Bill of Rights because you've had Alan Minsky and Neon, the co-authors of the 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights. You've had Matt Strackbine on and myself, and we turned all of that into a comic strip. I mean, it's got to be around something like that. By the way, it won't be simply around one policy, healthcare for all. It's got to be broader, because healthcare for all may not actually attract the unions that are central, pivotal to this coalition.
Often they're behind it because so it's got to be a set of principles that so that everybody's on the same page in terms of an agreement on some very basic principles,
right?
And B, so that you can almost give a certain amount of like grace regarding specific issues that are not addressed within the context of those principles, so that you can move forward and organize around some of those narrow principles.
And you guys have to win in New York, okay?
That's
got to be the message, okay? It's something like that.
Yep. Well, Harvey K, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
You brought a lot of joy and knowledge to Michael. He would cite you often. And we will put a link to some of your appearances on the Michael Brooks Show in our podcast and YouTube descriptions today. Again, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you guys again. Don't hesitate to ask.
Great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to hear from Alicia Brooks, Michael's sister, in just a moment. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It's always a pleasure to welcome Alicia Brooks, Michael's sister. Alicia, for years, was doing the Michael Brooks Legacy Project, and you can still obviously check that out at youtube.com/TMBS, I believe is the URL. Alicia, Michael would have been 42 today. And I know you just saw Milton and Harvey, two guests that he loved. But just wanted to check in and hear from you on this day. See, you have the painting. Oh, I remember that painting behind you.
Yes, I came to your house to rescue it.
That's such a cool one.
Yeah, thank you to all the amazing art that everyone made. I really appreciate it. Yes, so this year, well, first of all, about the Legacy Project, I'm in the throes of making this documentary about Michael, which has been like really amazing, and I can't wait for it to be done and be able to share it with the world. There's so many people that still are discovering his work, so it'll be so nice to just kind of have this place to kind of, talk about who he was as a young person and a student, and, kind of where he ended up and how he ended up impacting so many people around the world. Sam, when you asked if I wanted to come on last night, I was kind of, okay, is there anything like I can share that's like feels important, or, what's the purpose of me coming on? And kind of what I landed on was, I think people really miss Michael's, obviously his humor and his analysis, but also just like, he was so focused on strategy. And like, it's kind of what you guys were hitting on with Harvey just now, but like, just like really wanting to win. And, he and I would talk about just like little strategies between us just to be like having better lives. And so I just want to share that one thing we were talking a lot about, like everyone else was being on our phones less before he died. And one thing that we kind of talked about, which I want to share with everyone, if you're kind of just looking for like something to do to like honor Michael or think about Michael, is that we were trying to doom scroll less and just be more like actionable. Like I'm gonna, donate to an organization, send an email, make a phone call, and have that, read an article, and just be like much more like disciplined. And obviously this is easier said than done with how we're like using our energy online. And I feel like I'm really just feeling such burnout and overwhelm and anxiety. And the days when I like make a donation, listen to an interview, and then just like delete the app, log off, I feel just like, okay, at least I did something. On the days I just like scroll and scroll and scroll, I oftentimes just get so overwhelmed, so depressed, and I don't take an action. I noticed like a correlation. So I thought that might be a nice thing to share. Obviously, the things I'm focused on are, the genocide in Gaza and helping try and feed people there. Emma, thank you so much for really carrying the torch. And the SNAP programs being cut. My family grew up dependent on food, support and food stamps. And that was a program my dad was dependent on. So my dad passed away 4 years ago on 9th. And so I try and honor him by donating to local food banks. So I know that was a massive monologue, but that was kind of what came to mind when I thought, okay, should I go on, and do I have anything to say?
I appreciate that. That's a great strategy, and something I certainly like. It's very difficult in the context of this job.
Yeah, of course.
To not feel like your doom scrolling is like productive, but there are definitely times where it is not. Are there particular Gaza charities or places that you donate? Ones that Michael may have had? I mean, it's a very different circumstance right now, or at least a far more urgent one.
Yeah.
But if folks wanted to make a donation, if not in Michael's name and his spirit, what might be good for you?
I've been looking just to like his, former colleagues, and his the patrons are just like so amazing. And I follow a lot of people who are fans of Michael's who have kept me educated. I just see people posting various groups, and that's where I donate. You guys just had, Gaza Bakery was something you promoted. I don't. That may be a question for Abby Martin or people that Michael was, had a close relationship with, who had more of a, relationship with Gaza on the ground. I can definitely reach out to some former colleagues and see if something comes to mind, and you guys could mention it on a later show. But I don't have that answer offhand, no.
Okay. Well, I just wanted if there was something in particular, and if people wanted, I mean, obviously, just giving to a Gaza charity and doing it with Michael in mind, is, I think, accomplishes, what you can do at that point. Yeah. Were there other causes that Michael would have wanted people to contemplate the giving, just also in his spirit?
I mean, I feel like here, in the U.S., like one of the last things he was really talking about was just trying to just be like really aggressive and focused on food insecurity. And so there, there's obviously nothing is on the level of a genocide and people being starved to death, but obviously there's a lot of hunger and poverty everywhere in the world, but here in the U.S. as well. So I think just like local food pantries or groups, I always try and because we grew up in Western Massachusetts, I donate there, and I donate in LA because those are the communities I'm in. But I think Michael would oftentimes, if people were on strike, he would he was just very pragmatic with what was happening. He'd be trying to throw money around, just kind of taking action with who needed it, depending on what was going on. But I don't have a definitive these were the places he was always donating to.
Well, Alicia, it was great to hear from you, and I hope people take that bit of advice, and good opportunity both maintain one's sanity through this period, hopefully a finite period, and also think of Michael on any given random day in that spirit. And of course, we're going to link to youtube.com/TMBS, and very much looking forward to that documentary.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's just a place if someone, it's basically just archival at this point, and it's a way to support the documentary and interact with the archives. And then one last thing I'll plug is Michael worked really closely with a woman named Susan Green, who was helping him with some of his more spiritual anxiety and depression and things like that. And she's writing a book. It's not out yet, but it's called The Goddess Remedy. So I know folks sometimes look for ways of trying to connect with a more spiritual side. And so I just wanted to mention that work as well. I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for continuing to think of Michael, and hope you're all well.
All right. Thank you, Leisha. Great
Appreciate
to hear from you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
All right, folks, we're going to take one more break. And then when we come back, David Griscom will be here to say a few words hot off of the DSA convention or conference convention in Chicago. And David, of course, was one of Michael's producers, along with Matt Leck, whose name you may be familiar with on TMBS. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. pleasure to welcome back to the program David Griscom. He is one half of Left Reckoning, which is a show people may have heard about, and also was one of the what's that?
Forthcoming author.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it has a release date.
One of the producers on TMBS, the Michael Brooks Show, and now soon to be a published author.
Wow.
Cutting Fences, How
thank you,
Reclaiming
Matt.
Texas's Radical Tradition Can Help Us Beat the Right.
We're calling it The Myth of Red Texas now, but it'll be out from OR Books and The Nation magazine, hopefully in the next couple of months. So
That's exciting.
Looking forward to that.
Oh,
Thank you.
wait. So what? The Myth of Red Texas? Is that what?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a better name.
I think so. I was feeling a little literary, but Bhaskar
I know
fixed
that
for
was.
me.
Yeah, I mean that was. I get that. I get that. That is Cutting Fences. That's save that for your fiction.
Yeah, exactly.
For your novel.
I'm actually, Brian, if you want to put me on, I'm wearing my Fence Cutter T-shirt.
Oh, yeah, there
now,
we
which
go.
You can get in the Left Reckoning store, but.
Look at us. Look at us. It's good to see all y'all.
That's all right.
Good to see you as well.
Yes, good to see you, David. Long time.
I know, Emma.
Matt actually had to take a day off after your weekend because he was still so hungover.
It's not a hangover. It's an actual cold, and it's not COVID, or I wouldn't be here right now. So.
Yeah, he was working. He was working so hard. He wasn't, he was off the sauce the whole time.
I usually downplayed the whole super producer thing that Michael used to say, but I actually think I lived up to it this weekend.
There
if
you
I
go.
say so myself.
I would say so. Matt did some kind of superhuman producing for us. We were able to sit down with two of the Texas Democrats who fled the state. And Matt was on low HP, let's say, and he was still able to set up the camera and microphones perfectly. So very grateful for that.
I've just heard, speaking of which, that they are now contemplating coming back, that the first special,
Yeah, so the Senate basically, just folded immediately. And I haven't heard the most recent update, but there's only so many Democrats that would have to come back for them to regain quorum.
Right.
We spoke with Jean Wu and Rodriguez Ramos, and I will say, for the record, she did say that she's willing to stay there up to a year if need be. Now, I didn't get the same commitment from anybody else, so it's one of those things where, the Texas Democrats, like any kind of organization, you have a pretty good mix of people when it comes to political strategies. And it's a shame because, to fight the right, you really need a lot of unity, given how much power that they hold in the state. So I hope that they hold out, but it does look like the Greg Casar and Lloyd Doggett thing, I don't know if y'all saw that at all, but they've been kind of feuding a little bit, mainly from Lloyd's side. Because it seems like they're probably going to have to run against each other. And that's a kind of a signal to me that behind the scenes, the conversations are that these maps are going to go through.
Right. And we should just remind people, Doggett, certainly on the more sort of like a progressive side in the House, but Kazar obviously very much from the progressive side in the House. The big difference is that I think Doggett is literally twice Kazar's age plus some.
Yeah.
I think it's like the, whatever that dating formula is, like half your age plus 7. I think that's like plus your age, twice your age plus 7, I think is like the difference between Doggett and
And also, what he's asking for Casar to do is insane. He's asking him to run in the district that still would have the same name as his current district, but only includes 10% of his previous district and not the place that he's been organizing in, which is Austin, a much redder district. So Doggett is, being exactly what we've been critiquing about some of these old Democrats for so long, clinging on to power when this new district would have 90% of Casar's old area in it?
I just want to say, I have a tremendous respect for Lloyd Doggett. Lloyd Doggett's my congressman. He is one of the, he's not Casar is of a different kind of breed when it comes to progressive politics, but Lloyd Doggett comes from a really deep, Texas progressive tradition. And he's not only just some behind the scenes, he's always been somebody who's been really good at kind of upholding the next generation of Democrats in this state. He's been a mentor to so many people. And it's a kind of a sad thing to see the way that he's been acting here, especially given that he was one of the first, I believe he was the first congressional Democrat to call for Biden.
He was.
To drop out. So, to have said that just a few months ago and now say like, well, I have a lot of experience. We don't need youth in the party anymore. It's pretty disappointing.
I mean, I will say, like, as I get older, and I am, I'm not quite as older than everybody here as Lloyd Doggett is to Kazar, but it becomes easier to rationalize, like, well, yeah, I mean, the young whippersnappers, but I mean, the bottom line is you can't, like, how many more terms, like, what's he gonna do? Like, honestly, like, yeah, listen, you're what's he, 72, 74?
77, I believe.
77?
I'd have to double check that.
78. He's 78. Oh. Okay.
I
take this
Medicare
back.
for
Like, he
over
could
a
have had
decade.
2 or 3. He could have had, like, I thought he was like around 72. And it's like, okay, maybe you have 2 or 3 good terms left. But, when you get to be, if you're 78, take, and nobody's running against you, okay, fine. But when you're going to knock somebody out, or there's a potential for you to knock somebody out who is literally half your age, less actually, I guess 32, 34 is Kazar, I don't know, somewhere around there, who's got like 30, 40 years more to do in the house if he's going to stay even less than you at a younger age. It is just incomprehensible to me how you don't say, like, you know what, I'm going to go out a hero. I'm going to do this. I'm going to step aside. Like, and also, dude, you're 78. Go on freaking vacation. Like, go get a lobbying job for a year or two, right. And, to cover whatever it is that you want to go. I don't know.
No,
go spend the winter in Mexico. Like, go live your life.
Go to Cancun. Take a book from Cruz
yeah,
here.
go down to
But it sets him up for an ugly end to his legacy too. Because, like, look, I can try to put myself in someone else's shoes. Like, you want to be able to retire on your own terms, and what the Republicans are doing right now is so illegal, so egregious, and so offensive to the concept of democracy, right? But it's so frustrating to see, like, an experienced congressman like Lloyd Doggett, like, literally taking the right's bait, and instead of, like, fighting against all these attacks that we're getting from the right wing and the Republican Party, like, attacking not just like a young person. It's not just that Greg Casar's young. I mean, he is a vibrant leader, and
he's
Lloyd
the
Doggett,
chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
Right. Lloyd Doggett, what he said, he did this kind of similar thing that you hear from people like Biden, where he said that, like, oh, well, some of us aren't as good at social media as others, as if, like, all Greg Casar does is, like, make TikToks and be on Twitter, which I don't know. I find is pretty insulting to Greg Casar's record. He's already achieved so much in the few years that he's been in Congress. It's sad. I mean, I'm upset. I don't want to rail too much on Doggett because, like, he has been such a progressive force in Congress for so long. It's just a pretty disappointing chapter.
I mean, the alternate version of this is Doggett announces tomorrow, I am going to have to resign because these Texas lawmakers are doing something that's illicit. And I mean, he could go. I mean, it's just what better shot as opposed to I'm going to go out in 4 years when I can barely, remember where I left which state I'm from. With all due respect, I have, a family who are around that age and, but nevertheless, it's like, okay, even if you got 6 good more years where you're going to be able to squeak by, you're stifling the whole trajectory of people. And I don't know. It just, I don't understand. I don't understand that mentality. It's like, I don't get it. I really don't get it. All right. But with that said, just briefly, your time on TMBS. Just tell us a little bit about that and how that still resonates with you.
I think about Michael all the time. He was obviously, a big part of my life. And I've been thinking, a lot. I mean, we're getting to those anniversaries that frankly are like harder to reach. I mean, the first couple of years were really difficult, but it was so immediate. It felt so present. 5 years out or so, it's like it starts to, you start to worry that this might be a memory that maybe only you hold. And, it still is inspiring to see, his work continue through what y'all are doing. And so many people, we were just at the DSA convention in Chicago, so many people we were talking to were coming up to me and saying, hey, 7 years ago, I was in college or I was in high school, right? We're getting to that age now where that's happening. And, they're saying, I watched TMBS weekly and Michael encouraged me to get involved and I joined DSA and now look at all these campaigns I was doing. And it was really powerful to just talk to a lot of folks who've been so inspired by his work, who are now years later actually continuing that work and still holding everything that he did so dearly. So that was really special. But yeah, my relationship, man, I'll tell you, one thing I want to highlight about Michael today that I've been thinking about a little bit is, Michael obviously was a kind person. We were just talking about how he brought so many people into the movement, but he was a grade A hater too, right? When you were somebody who was attacking the downtrodden, I mean, he was somebody who was, the first person to be able to push back and fight against those folks. And that was a big reason why we liked Michael, right? He had a good sense of justice. He wasn't somebody who was messy, who wanted to pick fights for no reason, but he was a fighter 100%. And that's how I met Michael. Luke Mayville was one of my mentors and college professors. And when I first moved up to New York, I was, looking to connect with people, and Luke set me up with Michael. And I hadn't watched the Majority Report. I wasn't familiar with his work before. So I was kind of going in a little bit blind. And we were talking for a little bit, and I was, didn't really know what to say. And for some reason, I started talking about how much I hate Sam Harris. And that was probably the most perfect thing to bring up. Probably a bad thing to bring up in an interview with anyone else, just kind of,
random,
without no problem.
Media person, yeah.
But with Michael, immediately, he was all about it, and we just spent the next 45 minutes talking about Sam Harris, and he did an impression for me, which again I didn't know who Michael was or what was going on, so I was like, "Why is this guy doing a voice at me?" But in a lot of ways, a lot of the work that we did was about bringing people together and about love, but it was a kind of mutual hatred for a charlatan and a nasty figure like Sam Harris that first brought Michael and I together. And I have a feeling that a lot of people probably first came to Michael seeing him maybe taking down some of these right-wing charlatans. That's a big part of his legacy that I've been trying to hold a little close these days, because I think it's important to push back and fight back against our enemies right now, because the stakes are so high.
Well, Against the Web, his book, I don't know if I told you this. I maybe told Matt that at the DSA convention, when I was with Hassan, somebody came up and asked me to sign it. So someone had a copy of Against the Web there, just, and that's pretty awesome
it was
too.
Pretty shocking 5 years on to hear so many people cite that and him as what prompted them to get involved in socialist politics.
Yeah, the sad thing is a lot of those people are in power now, right? So it's more just as relevant as ever, the folks that he was challenging in that book.
100%. And I think, ridicule goes a long way into, and particularly based upon these people, a lot of the people that he would go after, it's not like they were, achieved their status based upon some sort of intricate notion of policy or whatnot. I mean, so much of it is vibe and sort of like an authority that came from, in many instances, I think outside money that was leveraged and got them into a system and sort of a feedback loop that just sheer mockery can really be effective in getting in between the relationship between these people and the people they're trying to sort of control, confuse.
You disempower them.
Exactly. And so Michael was exceptionally good at that.
And a lot of these people are cowards too. I mean, like a lot of these people, they kind of keep themselves in their bubble. They're afraid of, engaging with, I don't know, maybe an equal counterpart in debate. So they rely a lot on this kind of air of expertise. I mean, Sam Harris is probably the perfect example of this. I mean, this is somebody who for years was not just dipping his toe, cannonballing into kind of racial theories of intelligence and all this kind of stuff. And, he was treated for so long as just maybe an iconoclastic, but a left-wing intellectual who's just not afraid of speaking the truth. So it was good. You got to treat ideas like that as ridiculous, right? And I think that, again, Michael was not somebody who was, I think, unfair. But he also wasn't somebody who was going to, lean into civility that allows people who are pushing kind of dangerous and racial theories, to have their say without being challenged. So it's an important part of his legacy for sure.
Yeah, and folks can get obviously Against the Web still available in book and audio form.
Narrated by.
I read it. I mean, obviously, Michael had passed. He would have done it himself, and it would have been much funnier because he could do the voices. But I was basically doing Michael, sort of hinting at doing the Jordan Peterson and the Dave Rubin.
I listened to you do that on a treadmill in the villages in Florida.
Oh, really?
That's dark.
Wow. I don't know what to say, Brian. I'm sorry.
I don't get the testosterone flowing.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's gonna get you really angry. Down by all those old people. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, it would be. There are many times where I find myself wondering, what would Michael be doing in this situation? I mean, often it's I'm curious as to how he would handle this or where, because a lot of things, fractured in the wake. I mean, he passed away in July of 2020. We're still basically in lockdown, and in the wake of Bernie exiting the race, everyone was still sort of they're sort of adjusting to that reality, and a lot of things fractured in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that he kind of operated in a good space within left media and within left politics, where again, he was somebody who I've tried to learn a lot from him, in the year since I've taken a more active role in, talking about politics and things like that. And I think one skill, and it's just, I think that really at the end of the day, it's something that he just innately had, was that he was able to gain the trust of a lot of different people, people who really disagree on things. So when he was engaging on something, and maybe you were on the other side of it, you knew he was engaging with it in good faith. And, Michael and I worked really closely with Michael on TMBS and helped him kind of, craft and workshop a lot of the material and the content that we were doing there. And Michael and I would fight constantly, about things behind the scene, but it was a really, it was a friendly relationship. And that's a really rare thing to have in life, certainly in media, but just in general, right? Somebody who's sort of always challenging you and making you better, that you don't have this resentment for or anger towards. And, he was able to operate that one with his close friends, but I think also a lot of people just in the audience who might come to this idea because it's sort of being pushed in left-wing circles. And, Michael might be the only person who they're hearing who's maybe not opposed to us or on the right, who's making these arguments. And he just had tremendous amounts of trust, because people knew when Michael was making an argument that might disagree with their priors or something that they were, been engaged in, that he wasn't coming from a bad place. Everybody knew that Michael Brooks wanted to see a very strong, competent, and powerful left-wing movement in this country. And, I think that as we've seen things fragment, as you were saying, Sam, it did create a kind of a vacuum. And I think we're all still sort of poor because of his loss, because of our loss.
Yeah, well said. David Griscom, thanks so much. Folks can tune into this show. What is it? Reckoning?
Reffining.
Left reffining. That's what Brian called
said
it
that on accident yesterday when I plugged you guys there.
It's about referees.
Brian was so Brian was so inundated yesterday. He was trying to give the outro, and he's a left reffining.
Matt really is a super producer. It's so hard to do this alone. You're like a prog rock keyboardist reaching across two different keyboards.
No, but we had a big show last night.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, man, we had Seth Harp on the program to talk about his new book, which people should get, The Fort Bragg Cartel.
Yeah.
Olivia Catby and Neil Meyer on. We talked a lot about DSA convention and a little bit about this Lloyd Doggett stuff as well. So people should check it out if they haven't.
Check out Left Reckoning. Or Left Reffining goes by either.
Or Reft Reckoning.
In terms of my neurological capacity.
David, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Let's see here. Well, let's go to a fun half. No, let's go to a fun half. It'll be a short fun half, but that way I don't want to scare people off with a 2.5 hour show. I don't know. That's the theory. Folks, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member, join the majorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, you also get the fun half. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, hot chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Left Reckoning, double plug today.
Oh no, I thought that was going to be the plug. I was also just going to say, did you guys cover yesterday how conservatives are upset that that gay people are gay men are allowed to be cheerleaders now and not just straight men?
Oh, we've already prepared for that today.
We're excited to discuss it.
Oh yeah.
We don't have to discuss it.
Only straight guys can be cheerleaders, like the 80s.
Jonathan Armstead, one I am one of the on the first memorial show for Michael, frequent caller and I am Jeff from Georgia, who has also passed away, called in with a great note. He said that Michael was so funny that him laughing at a joke made you feel flattered because of the respect you had for him. I once wrote in with a silly comment that the P tape was real because Trump said to the prostitute, "You're an 8," and Michael's uproarious laugh followed by "not bad" still sticks with me. Indeed. I know a lot of people have stories like that. Folks, we'll see you in the fun half.